Hello! It is time for my February wrap-up video, and as you might have seen if you've been following along my channel this month, I am doing my wrap-ups a little bit differently now. So every time I read 5 books, I am filming a wrap-up video talking about those 5 books, what they're about and what I thought of them, just so that I can go into a little bit more depth on each of those books for you. And then at the end of the month I'm going to do this wrap-up video where I'm going to quickly run through all of the books I read and what age group and genre they fall in, and then talk a little bit about statistics. And when I say statistics, I only mean specifically towards my reading goals for the year. I will save full-on statistics for my end of the year statistics video. I hope that all made sense. If not, let me know. Hopefully it will make sense by the end of the video anyway. So I read 14 books again this month, so I have done 3 wrap-up videos individually, and the books that I read were Eight Will Fall by Sarah Harrion, which is young adult fantasy, although I'm calling it horror because I found it pretty scary. A lot of people probably wouldn't agree that this is horror though. Warcross by Marie Lu, which is young adult science fiction. Summer Wars Volume 1 by Mamoru Hosoda and Ikura Tsujimoto, which is science fiction manga, and I have no idea of age range. Then I read The Test by Sylvain Novelle, which is adult? I think maybe young adult. It seemed pretty heavy in theme, so I'm going to say adult, and it was dystopian. Then we have Wildcard by Marie Lu, which is book 2 in the Warcross duology, which is also young adult science fiction. Then I read the ACOTAR series by Sarah J. Maas, so A Court of Thorns and Roses, A Court of Mist and Fury, and A Court of Wings and Ruin, and all of these are young adult or new adult fantasy romance. Heartstopper Volume 3 by Alice Oseman. This is a young adult romance graphic novel. The High Lord by Trudy Canavan is young adult fantasy. Summer Wars Part 2, which again is manga science fiction, and I have no idea of age range, although I suspect it's probably young adult, possibly even, yeah, probably young adult. Poison Study by Maria V. Schneider is young adult fantasy. Shadows of Self by Brandon Sanderson, adult fantasy. And finally, Illuminae by J. Christoph and Amy Kaufman is young adult science fiction. So those are the 14 books that I read in the month of February. So just as a reminder, some of my main goals are 1, to film at least 1 book review each month, and I think I've done this a couple of times over this month actually. So I filmed a reading challenge reading these 3 books and vlogged the entire experience, so I was giving my full thoughts and review of those 3 books as I was going along. And then I also did a review and comparison of the Summer Wars duology and the Warcross duology. So I did a couple of dedicated reviews this month, so we can tick off that particular goal. I also want to read more broadly this year, so I'm keeping an eye on the various genres of books that I'm reading, and in particular I want to focus on reading classics, horror, science fiction, contemporary romance and historical fiction. Now I haven't read any historical fiction this month or so far this year, so I'm failing a little bit there, and I didn't read any contemporary or classics this month. As I said though, I am counting Eight Will Fall as horror because although it's probably not categorised as horror, it's horror for me, and I think I am going to have to be a little bit broad in my definition of horror just because of how much of a wimp I am. I'm going to need to include stuff that probably isn't horror to the majority of people, but it counts as horror for me. So I read 1 of those. I read 3 science fiction books, so Illuminae and Warcross and Wildcard. Like I said, I didn't read any contemporary, but I did read some romance this month. So of course I read Heartstopper, which is definitely romance, and then I'm also including the ACOTAR series as romance as well. Although it's romance fantasy, I'm still counting it because actually romance fantasy or fantasy romance is my favourite brand of romance, so I definitely think that it should count. I also read a dystopian, which was The Test by Sylvain Novelle, and 2 volumes of manga and a graphic novel. So I think that I did pretty well in terms of reading broadly this month. And my last main goal for the year is to continue with series wherever possible. So of course I read this series all in one go, so that counts towards that goal. And I also continued the Mistborn series by reading Shadows of Self by Brandon Sanderson. In addition to that, I read the whole of the Warcross duology and the whole of the Summer Wars duology. Are we calling this a duology? I'm not sure. Heartstopper was a continuation. Illuminae was a reread in order for me to continue with the series. And The High Lord by Trudy Canavan was the completion of a reread of this series. So although it was not an original read of the series, it still counts as continuing a series because I actually finished the series reread. So overall, I think I've done pretty well with my reading and my goals this month. Let me know if you're keeping track of any goals this year, and if you are, how are you doing so far? I'd be really interested to know. But that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks. Bye.